news press. We have had excellent articles of late and some forums in the newspaper. So it is a pleasure to be able to do this in person.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to be here today. We're going to ask our candidates to come on up, grab their microphones, and turn them on. We're joined today by Representative Trish Ranson and challenger Michael Baughman, candidates for Oklahoma House District 34, which encompasses the heart of the city of Stillwater, which you will see up on the screens. At Steve Norman's suggestion, we have that map up. I thought was a good idea, so we've done that. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening and closing statements. I will ask prepared questions with the candidates alternating going first. They'll have 90 seconds to respond to each question. There will be no questions from any of you. And we will begin with an opening statement from Representative Ranson. I'm sorry, yes, Representative Ranson, you have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon. I'm Trish Ranson, State Representative for House District 34. I have been the representative for this district for the last 4 years. In 2018, I was a music teacher at Westwood Elementary. Decided to join the teacher walkout. That got me motivated. Ended up filing for office. Never ran for anything before that. And so that was a big learning curve, but won in 2018. Fast forward to 2020, won re-election in 2020. So now we are here in 2022. Issues that I have seen in the 19 years that I have lived in Stillwater are close to my heart as far as making sure that we are suitably funding public education and that we have access to affordable healthcare and making sure that everybody in the state of Oklahoma is treated equally and equitably. So those are the issues that I have been seeing and I've been hearing on the doors. And it is a joy to be here. It's always the hot seat. I mean, I'd prefer to sit over there, but that's okay. And I enjoy the opportunity to share with you. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Baughman, 2 minutes.
Yeah, my name is Michael Baughman. I'm from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and I moved here to go to college at Oklahoma State University, and I graduated last year as a junior. And right now I am a shift lead manager at Insomnia Cookies down on the Strip. And I'm also a part of an organization called Run Gen Z, where we recruit, train, and help younger people run for office and get younger people participated in the electoral process. One of the main things I really want to get done inside Oklahoma is talk about education, but how we are spending our education dollars. Are we making it directly to the classroom and the teachers, or are we spending it on bloated administration costs or costs that really doesn't make any sense? I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about how we are having the Chinese Communist Party buying up farmland in our state en masse, enough to where the entire state of Delaware can fit inside Oklahoma. I want to make sure that we have our sovereign land to make sure that our farmers can grow our food, so the food crisis that we're having is not exacerbated. And I also want to make sure that we can have a conversation about term limiting our federal representation, because right now we are having people in office that are serving 20 years, 30 years. I think that's outrageous. We need to have a conversation and think of a plan that we can fix that. And my solution, and a lot of states are talking about this, is having a conversation about if Oklahoma, for example, has the right to send our 5 congresspeople and 2 senators to the state capitol, we also have the right to say how long they can serve. So I think that's a great solution. I don't know if it can work, but I really want to try that and make sure that we term limit our federal representation so we can have new people run for office.
All right, Mr. Baughman, the first question goes to you. Violence at schools, places of worship, and other public locations has become a national crisis. What should we be doing in Oklahoma to address this problem? As part of your answer, is arming teachers a viable option?
So the first question that was asked, to fix gun violence, I feel like it's a 3-term solution. Number one, we need to make sure that we expand background checks to people who are under 21 to make sure to open up their juvenile records. For example, I don't think somebody who committed an atrocity whenever they're 16 or 17 years old, they get an automatic clean slate when they turn 18 years old. A lot of inner city gangs use 18-year-olds to buy a firearm for them because they know their slate is clean. So we need to make sure that we have background checks on those people. The number of school shootings that happen are committed mostly by people who are 18 or their students. So I want to make sure that we have that in place. Number two, I want to make sure that we tackle mental health. I think it's been stigmatized, and we need to make sure that we're having students not afraid to come forward whenever they're having a mental health crisis. And then finally, number 3, let me ask you all this. Who would you rather have a firearm? A 16-year-old 100 years ago or a 16-year-old today? I think the maturity level in our students is outrageous. We need to make sure we're teaching respect for firearms. I would love to have a course where it's optional to teach respect for firearms and having students learn and train how to use one. And to answer the second question, can teachers be armed? No, I don't think teachers should be armed. They have a billion other things on their plate. And I want to make sure that they are strictly teaching math, arithmetic, and inspiring their students. Now, if somebody wants to arm a secretary and they're trained, I would be for that. They're at the front door. So I want to make sure that we can have that option.
All right, Representative Ranson.
Can I just clarify 2 things? Number 1, yellow means what?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, and red means stop.
Finish
Okay.
up.
Just making sure that I understand what that signal is. And the 2 questions are about violence and then should teachers be armed?
Yes.
But violence in public space is not just schools.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. We live in a state that has passed permitless carry. So regardless of background, regardless anything, that if you are 18 and over, you can purchase a firearm. There is no background checks. There are no red flag laws. In fact, we banned any idea or talk of a red flag law. That has not made our state safer. In fact, it has made our state even more unsafe. The idea that a good guy with a gun counteracts a bad guy with a gun does not really work in real life. Should teachers be required to be armed in schools? No.
Shouldn't be allowed to be.
Correct. Because here's the thing. A school is a school. It is supposed to be an open place for learning. At what point does a school become a prison? And I think when we arm teachers, when we arm staff, it can very closely and very quickly become a place where learning does not happen and is treated more like in a prison situation. And so that's not the answer. But we do need to make sure that we look at our gun laws to make sure that they're more modern and make our state safer, excuse me.
All right, Representative Ranson, next question is yours. The relationship between a Republican governor and a Republican-controlled legislature has been tenuous. The legislature quickly overrode several vetoes prior to adjourning in the spring, including the bill that required the governor's appointees and cabinet secretaries to file financial disclosures. Share with us your perspective on how we move forward.
Well, electing a new governor would be good. Sorry. But here's the thing. You would think that a governor and the legislature, supermajority legislature of the same party would make things streamlined. And what we have found is quite the opposite, that the supermajority has factions within it. And the righter leaning faction tends to control what all of the legislature sees, hears, and passes. The governor has gone even further to the point where the legislature does not trust him. I think that's a fair statement. And the governor, I don't think, trusts the legislature either. And so there's that. But I think going ahead, if we were able to elect a new governor, then we would have a really interesting situation where we would have a Democratic governor and a Republican supermajority, because we still will have a Republican supermajority, and the requirements of both to work together to get things passed. I think Joy's history as being a Republican before will help that, and being a moderate will be helpful as well.
Mr. Baughman.
Can you repeat the question?
The relationship between a Republican governor and a Republican-controlled legislature has been tenuous. The legislature quickly overrode several vetoes prior to adjourning in the spring, including a bill that required the governor's appointees and cabinet secretaries to file financial disclosures. Share with us your perspective on how we move forward.
Yeah, so how we move forward is we need to work with each other. We need to work with the Democrat minority, the Republican supermajority, and the governor in tandem to make sure we pass laws. I think talking to the people of this district and hearing a lot of outside of this district, people are afraid of what's happening, not only in this country, but in this state. We are having fentanyl being poured into our state. And right now we are not doing anything about it. I have had to talk to people who had children, their children, 17, 18-year-old, take one fentanyl pill and then never wake up again. We need to make sure that we pass laws like that the majority of Oklahomans want, that actually prosecute people who are dealing fentanyl. I would love to pass a law, and I would love to write a law when elected, to where if you are in possession of fentanyl enough to where it can be levied against you for distribution, you get charged with attempted murder. Because right now, everybody knows it. If you are in possession of fentanyl, you know what it does, you know what it can do to people. It's stuff like that we need to get past. We don't need to talk about the controversial issues. We don't need to talk about the things like that. We need to talk about the things that people in this state that they want. For example, they don't want the Chinese Communist Party buying farmland in the state. I haven't talked to anybody that doesn't disagree with that statement. We need to make sure that we are not paying our superintendents or administration hundreds of thousands of dollars while we're paying our teachers $40,000 to $50,000. We need to make sure the legislature works together with the minority, the Republican supermajority, and the governor in tandem.
All right, thank you. Next question goes to you, and this is my longest question. The governor's proposal to eliminate the state portion of the grocery sales tax did not pass out of the legislature during the regular session. The governor called the legislature back into special session for that purpose and to cut personal income taxes. The House then passed a series of bills on both proposals, but the Senate dug its heels in favor of taking what they called a more methodical approach. Do you agree with these proposals from the governor, and how will you proceed in the next session?
Yeah, so I agree with the governor that we need to eliminate the grocery tax. However, I feel like whenever we rush into things to get rid of the grocery tax or get rid of income tax, I feel like a lot of people don't discuss how we're going to supplement that income or what we're going to have to cut to make sure that happens. I want to make sure that we do have the funds to implement programs that might get cut or don't get cut. For example, whenever we eliminate the grocery tax, how are we going to fill that space back up? I, for one, would love to look at the budget and make sure every single dollar is spent. Even though we have a balanced budget amendment in Oklahoma, there are things that we can cut that can be considered wasteful spending. For example, Oklahoma State University gets taxpayer dollars from the state. However, they have public speakers that come in and charge $40,000 for 1 hour. I'm making sure that Oklahoma State University spends those tax dollars wisely. And I want to know if that dollar that paid $40,000 for 1 hour is taxpayer money. So I think we need to make sure that we're holding people accountable and holding our taxpayers en route. We need to make sure that we're holding our state dollars accountable. Excuse me.
All right.
So as far as the grocery tax, the idea of cutting grocery tax at the state portion, at least, was a Democratic idea, actually. And so then it was taken over by the governor, which is fine. Good idea is a good idea. And however, it was stalled mainly because of the idea that it's just the state portion. So that's going to be 4%. We can't touch sales tax because our municipalities rely entirely on sales tax for their budgets. That's for fire, that's for police, that's for roads and bridges. So we've got to make sure that we keep that intact because our cities need to be able to function. When it comes to the pro tem deciding, let's look at the tax code a little bit more, he's wanting to get to a point where we can get to close to 0% income tax as possible. That alarms me because we've got to have money to run the government in some way, shape, with the services. I mean, public dollars should be for public education, public health, public safety, all of those things. So we have to have funds for that. If we try something else like other states, let's say like Texas, then that's going to mean property tax. And that is not going to go over very well in our state. So figuring out, trying to reform the tax code, absolutely. But I think we all need to make sure that everyone pays their fair share.
All right, Representative Ranson, there continue to be efforts nationwide and in Oklahoma to shift the power to redistrict legislative boundaries from state legislatures to citizens commissions. How do you believe redistricting should be handled in Oklahoma?
You know, that's a really interesting question, because what I found out is one of the things, being in the legislature, we are part of the process, and everyone was part of the process, majority and minority. But what we see here in our state is that as state legislators, we are term limited to 12 years. Well, the census happens every 10. So what we find out is that most of the legislatures legislators, excuse me, have no experience with redistricting. And the ones who were there the last time were newbies. So they really didn't understand the process either. So that the weight of all of redistricting goes to the staff who have institutional knowledge. So what we've seen lately at the Capitol, our institutional knowledge, our staff has been shuffling. So we don't have as much institutional knowledge as possible. The idea of having a separate committee to do so, if we could establish some of that seniority in there, some tenure, where there would be people that would understand how to do it every time, I think that would be a really great thing, and especially if they are community members who are rooted in their home communities across the state.
So I have a friend who worked on the redistricting commission, and she put it to where the legislatures are elected and the legislatures are the ones to draw out the maps. And she says that's a perfect example of a democratic process, because if you elect your officials, you elect them to do the job. And one of the jobs is to redistrict. I think that's a perfect scenario. And we have checks and balances. For example, whenever the New York State drew their maps, the court struck it down. We have the same exact scenario here where courts can strike it down. So I think that's a good system we have here. I don't think it needs to be changed. We can work with the Democrat minority and the Republican supermajority. And if the governor likes it, he can sign it. But I think we just need to work together and make sure that we continue the system that has worked out.
All right, Mr. Baughman, common education funding continues to be a hot button issue, with the legislature increasing the education budget by about 1% for the current fiscal year. Do you believe this was an appropriate funding decision?
So whenever I talk about education funding, I talk about accounting every single dollar that is spent, because it's so important that we're funding our school systems. But I feel like we're not funding the teachers in the classrooms. We're funding bloated administration costs. We're having superintendents and some principals who are arguably making too much money than what they're worth. We're having some superintendents that have 50 kids in their district making six-figure salaries, while teachers in those same communities are making $40,000 to $50,000. I think it's appalling that we're not talking about the teacher pay gap between those two professions. And I want to make sure that we're bringing in new educators. But how can we bring in new educators in these rural communities whenever they get told, oh, you might be making $40,000 to $50,000? We need to make sure that we have a more fair system of how we're paying our staff, our teachers, and our administrators, because right now there is too much bloat. And I think that is a #1 issue on why we need to look carefully at the budget and make sure people are being paid a fair salary.
So this is a really nuanced topic, and the idea of funding for public education, it is a moving target every year. Because the states around us are always changing what their salary schedule for teachers. And so the school districts, their #1 expenditure is salaries. So if you think about that, that is people. And in our rural communities, some of our rural communities, the largest employer of that community is the public school. So then how do you go forward with making sure that they can attract talent? And oftentimes that means offering more pay for a superintendent to come into the rural community. There is a big pay gap in that. And I think we need to be looking at what is appropriate going forward. Every time we talk about rural and looking at the funding, the C word comes up, consolidation. And that is a really tough subject, because if communities consolidate, there's usually one community that dies because of it. When they lose their school, they lose their community, they lose their employer. And so that is a really big issue. But when it comes to our funding formula, we have a good funding formula. Where we fail is that we do not put enough public dollars into the formula to make it successful.
All right, Representative Ranson. Education has become the hottest of hot button issues this year. Pick any education topic and tell us how you propose to address it. Wide open.
Wide open. That's, wow. Okay, there you go. All right, so vouchers, that's a big issue. Yes, thank you for whoever sneezed. So the idea is that, we have public dollars go into the pot, and then parents can take their money out for their per pupil expenditure and take that money to a private school and put their child in the private school. Per pupil expenditure comes nowhere close to a yearly tuition. So what's going to happen if that were the case? Then you're going to have tuition go up that same amount. That's kind of how things have worked in other states. It's probably what's going to happen here too. It will be a rural school killer in the sense that there are no other options in a lot of our rural communities. The public school is the school. There is no private school. There is no charter. There's nothing. So then you have a vast scale system or class system, in the sense that some students, depending on where they live, are going to get a better education than other students because of where they live. And when that happens, I think that will be the most detrimental to our state. We need to make sure that we are funding education so that public dollars go into public education, and that no matter where the child lives, that they are able to get a good education.
Mr. Baughman.
Yeah, so one of the issues I'm really passionate about is that the current curriculum that we're having inside our public school system is not teaching our kids how to live in the real world. They're teaching our kids how to take a multiple choice test. And I think it's outrageous that we're graduating students en masse that don't know how to negotiate a bank loan, that don't know how to apply for a part-time job, that don't even know how to write a check. So I want to make sure that we enhance the curriculum and teach our kids how to live in the real world. I'm talking about life skills classes. How many of you all went into a public school and got taught home ec, a cooking class, a shop class, and it was mandatory? I want to expand those opportunities and cut certain curriculums that are considered bloated. I don't know any high schooler that wants to force to take calculus. If you want to be an engineer, go ahead and take calculus. But why are we forcing some of our kids to take another year of math whenever they got all their math requirements out? We need to make sure that we have options for students and parents so that they know that their children are receiving a quality education and actually graduating with the real world. I think a bunch of big billion-dollar testing organizations got inside Oklahoma, got their tentacles inside Oklahoma, and started saying, you need to test our children. And then we get our test results the next year. We don't even know how our students are scoring after those tests are administered. So I want to make sure that we have life skills classes and actually educate our kids to live in the real world, not how to take a multiple choice test.
All right, Mr. Baughman, state question 820 will appear on the March 2023 ballot. If approved, recreational marijuana use in Oklahoma will be legal while still federally illegal. Where do you stand on this ballot initiative?
So right now, marijuana, and I think this is the opinion of everybody in this room, it's already recreational. You can come in with a stub toe and then get a medical marijuana card and get marijuana. So I want to make sure that first and foremost, we reform the law that's already been passed. And sadly, since it's inside the state constitution, I don't think there's enough wiggle room in there, but we can always try to reform that law that was passed. I don't want anybody going in there that doesn't need it for medical reasons to get a marijuana card. I want to make sure we reform that, and the taxing by it. And I want to go to the mom and pop shops that are selling marijuana, because actually they are seeing the brunt of it because they cannot bank because it's federally illegal. Some banks won't even take a business that is selling marijuana. And I think they're afraid to have that much cash on hand that they're getting out of the business. And all these big marijuana companies, these $1 million, $1 billion marijuana companies, big marijuana coming into Oklahoma and getting mom and pop marijuana shops out of the business because they have the infrastructure, they have the accountants that can go in and do all of this funding, even with cash on hand. So I want to make sure that we pass a law in Oklahoma that can actually reform the medical marijuana system that we have in this state. And frankly, maybe we can even do some state banking when it comes to it. I don't want anybody to be afraid of owning a business and being afraid to be robbed because you have so much cash on hand.
When it comes to the ballot initiative, it really doesn't matter where I am on it. I think it will pass. And the reason it will pass is because of what I've seen in other states. If they've gone medical first, they often go recreational. Pros and cons. So if it passes and we have recreational, we'll still have the medical marijuana. That's still enshrined in the Constitution. So we'll still have that. But the recreational, we could change things like 21 and over. So the age, instead of 18, change it to 21. We could do that. We could tax it differently. And we already are growing more than what can be consumed in the state. So then, you know, as far as our folks who are in the business, then maybe they'll be able to make more money at it. I don't know. But I just do know that I'm a little leery about it being the answer to all of the problems in the sense of medical marijuana, because other states have also seen that even with the changes, it's kind of been a wash afterwards. So it's not going to be the miracle crop. It's not going to, you know, save us from poverty. It's not going to do all of those things. It's going to bring a whole other host of problems that we have and that we are dealing with as well.
All right, Representative Ranson, the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority is moving forward with plans to expand the turnpike system in the densely populated Norman area over the strenuous objections of affected property owners. Do you believe this is an appropriate use of state authority?
I don't. And here's the thing, because the way it was sold to everybody, it was like this open farmland, and it's not. It's a very populated area. The fact that the Turnpike Authority, there hasn't been much check on them, and now it feels wrong, quite honestly. And so if we're looking at fixing a problem, what is the problem? Number one, or do we want to make sure that I-35 isn't as congested? Okay, maybe that's a good problem to look at. But at the same time, do we really want to take authority and over eminent domain and taking land? I think, you know, if that's the case, we need to up the price for eminent domain. Folks who have had generations on that land should be able to be paid appropriately.
Mr. Baughman.
You know, whenever people talk about the turnpike and how people are being displaced with their homes, I think it's incredibly hypocritical that we are having Chinese Communist Party officials buying farmland in the state en masse, and then our government is displacing people who have been on the land for generations. So I think, number one, it's not fair. So I want to find a way to work around it. If anything is not fair, I'm completely against it. And number two, I want to make sure that we do have the Turnpike Authority, making sure that we do have a way, because Oklahoma is growing. Oklahoma is expanding. From the redistricting commission that my friend was on, she told me we were a couple of thousand people away from getting a new congressional seat inside Oklahoma. So Oklahoma is growing, and it's part of the new pro-business policies that our state legislature and then our governor has passed. So I want to make sure that we find compromise between getting a new turnpike in to accommodate for the growing, because Norman is expanding, Stillwater is, I think, expanding, and Oklahoma City is expanding. So I want to make sure that we work in tandem with the right people to not displace generation ownership of land, but to actually find solutions to accommodate the expanding Oklahoma.
All right. Closing statements will be in the opposite order of opening statements, and we're going to give you 3 minutes instead of the 2 I said. So, Mr. Baughman, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much, you guys, for having this forum. I really do appreciate the amount of people that have attended and the amount of people that are actually going to go out and vote. I'm running because I want change in Oklahoma. I want to change the curriculum that's teaching our kids how to take a multiple choice test, not teaching them how to live in the real world. I want to make sure that we are tackling the fentanyl crisis that is happening in this state. I do not want anybody, 17, 16-year-old, to take a pill and then fall asleep forever. I want to make sure that we have stricter laws on that. And then finally, I want to make sure that Oklahoma is prosperous and continues to grow and be the shining example. Right now, we're having a shining example right now. Oklahoma has influenced, I think, New York from getting rid of their voting machines and making New York go more of the Oklahoma standard of voting. I want to make sure Oklahoma is like that shining example. And I think the continuation of these pro-business policies that continue Oklahoma to keep growing is the most effective way to run the state. I want to work with the state legislature, not only with the Democrat minority, but the Republican supermajority and the governor, whether it's Joy Hoffmeister or Kevin Stitt. I want to make sure that we work in tandem together to make Oklahoma grow and be more prosperous. Thank you.
Representative Ranson.
Well, thank you for, I'm a teacher. I got to stand up. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I have to say that, you know, in 2018, being in front of this club was extremely scary. It was being in front of grown-ups, large groups of grown-ups is scary. I mean, I can be in front of a large group of children, that's fine. But one of the things that I have learned through this experience the last 4 years is that Oklahoma has a lot of issues. It has a high poverty rate. There are times where we turn against each other because the opposite of really digging down and doing the work is too scary. And I see that a lot. But what I also see is that we have an amazing wealth of the people. When we work together, it is an amazing thing. I took a recent tour of the National Memorial in Oklahoma City. And I have to say that I know I've been there, but it's been a long time. And to actually have the experience at the state capitol and working in Oklahoma City and then going to the memorial, it was a game changer. In the talk about the Oklahoma standard, about how even instead of running away, we had people running toward. And I see that change coming here in Oklahoma, where we run toward a solution. And it's only going to happen when we work together. I've had an amazing experience the last 4 years. There have been bad days, absolutely. But there have been good days. And the good is that I keep discovering the good in our community, the good in our state, and the resolve to continue to do the work. So I thank you very much for having us here today, and I ask for your vote on November 8th.
Thanks to both of you for being here today. In-person absentee voting begins next Wednesday at the Payne County Election Board. Election day is November 8th. The candidates will be available for a few minutes at the conclusion of our meeting.
Okay, let's give them another great big hand. Thank you. Thank you very much.